Hello friends, I am Vinodkumar Ashok Pradhan. I welcome you in this video on Elizabethan poetry. Let us try to understand what is meant by Elizabethan poetry. So friends, this is an image of Queen Elizabeth. So as an example, I have taken this image from internet. So let us try to understand that what is meant by Elizabethan poetry, what kind of poetry was created, and who were the precursors of Elizabethan poetry. That is 1558 to 1603 is the period of Elizabethan poetry. Now, this age is known as by the name of the Queen or the Great Poet. So Shakespeare was the great poet of that period, and for that purpose, this age is also called as the age of Shakespeare, and by the name of Queen, that is the Elizabethan age or the age of Shakespeare. These are the two names for this Elizabethan poetry. This age was important for the rise and growth of patriotism and nationalism. English people and they had brought about an unprecedented progress in almost all the branches of its variegated life. So you can understand here that there was a rise and growth of patriotism and nationalism. That means the people from all the branches, they were trying to devote their work themselves to their nation. So they were true patriots. Next, it was the age of Queen Elizabeth. So Elizabeth the First, or Elizabeth, yes, and it extends from 1558 to 1603, as we have seen earlier, comprising the half of the 16th century. Now, it was the age in which the mind of the people was set free from trammels of medievalism, and they were free from religious persecution, from fear of poverty and starvation, and from the fear of a foreign invasion. Means the people were feeling very safe under the reign of this Queen Elizabeth, and for that purpose, creativity was coming out of them. Then it was an age or era of social, political, and religious peace. So in every field, there was a kind of peace for the people. Peace, they were living peacefully and were generating their art very happily. Men were now free to devote themselves to art and literature. So much art and literature was produced in Elizabethan age. So it was an era of great adventures, travels, and discoveries, which fired the imagination of the people and impelled them to create. Creative activities were done by the people at that time, as they were feeling themselves very comfortable. And because of this, this age of Queen Elizabeth was called as Golden Age of English Literature in the history of English literature. Next, in the Elizabethan age, we can divide this into two parts. First part is called the Age of Spencer, which extends from 1558 to 1579, and the second part is known as Age of Shakespeare, which extends from 1579 to 1603. The first part was the time of preparation for Elizabethan literature, and the second is full of blossom and fruition. Then Renaissance, which means revival or rebirth of ancient Greek and Roman literature, mythology, and culture, and that served as a source of inspiration to the writers of this period. So here we can understand that the English poets or the Elizabethan poets were the imitators, and they had imitated their art from the Greek and Roman poets or their literature. Then awakening of human mind to the vastness, beauty, and wonder of the world as a result of an adventure undertaken by the sailors of England of other countries of Europe. So here you can understand that the vastness, beauty, and wonder of the world as a result of adventure undertaken by the sailors. So there were sailors, and there were some other visitors to England, and for that purpose, the exchange of culture and literature of each other had taken place, and the awakening of the human mind was taken place at that time. Then the whole age was marked by rich poetic sensibility, nature, appetite for learning and literature, and love for aesthetic faculty. So here we can understand that the poetic sensibility was at its height, and as they had read the ancient Greek and Roman literature, they got inspired by that literature, and they tried their level best to create their own poetry and literature, and they became successful. Because of such a growth of poets and singers, this age was called nest of singing birds in the history of world's literature. So this is one remarkable thing, that these poets were blooming and creating their art in such a manner that this particular age is called as nest of singing birds, because there were many poets creating their poetry. So specifically, who were the poets created their poetry and became famous? Number one was Spenser, then Bacon, and William Shakespeare, who grew from boyhood in the youth in the early years of Elizabethan age, and they produced wonderful works of literature by the 16th century. Next are Sir Thomas Watt, Earl of Surrey. These are the poets who introduced sonnets to England, and they paved the way for Sidney, Edmund Spenser, and Shakespeare to write sonnets. Then, which were the pastoral, that is poetic genres in the Elizabethan age that were famous? Number one, that is pastoral, in which we have songs, dialogues, funeral elegies, romances like John Milton's Lycidas. Then satires were there, lyrical poems were there, in which hymns were there, and odes, then epithalamiums. Songs were popular as ballads, madrigals, and airs, and the sonnets of Shakespeare were famous. Then mythological erotic poems like Marlowe's Hero and Leander were famous, and epic poems like The Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser were famous in Elizabethan age. The famous and foremost type of poetry in this Elizabethan age was the sonnets. So what is mean by a sonnet? So basically sonnet means a lyric of fixed lines or a fixed form, means it contains 14 lines and written in iambic pentameter. Then what were the themes of this poetry? Sonnets were love, political issues, personal feelings, religious thoughts, and occasional issues were discussed in these sonnets. Then sonnet sequences, a series of 14-line sonnets exploring the contrary state of love, addressed to a central figure, often a woman with a symbolic name, about conventional themes. So by this we can understand that mostly the sonnets were written on the theme of love. Next we have Italian sonnet. In this there were Petrarchan sonnets. So this Petrarchan sonnet had its own rhyme scheme, like octave, means two quatrains were there of 4 lines, And rhyme scheme used to be ABBA, ABBA, and it expresses the first half of an idea or question. Poses a question. Next is sestet, two tercets. So tercet means a stanza of 3 lines. So here, two sestets. So CDE, CDE used to be the rhyme scheme, or CDC and DCD, etc. So the poets were making changes into the rhyme scheme of these terzets. It develops the idea expressed in the octave or gives the answer to the question. And volta means a pause between the octave and the sestet. So friends, you might have understood here that this octave means stanza of 8 lines, but here what happens, quatrain means stanza of 4 lines. So two quatrains means, to in total this becomes an octave, or 8 line stanza. So these 8 plus 6 is equal to 14. So automatically this sonnet becomes of 14 lines. Next, you might have seen here that first was Italian sonnet and next one is this English sonnet. So this sonnet is also called as Shakespearean sonnet because Shakespeare made some favorable changes which were liked by the people and became famous. So it is known as Shakespearean sonnet. How it was different from that Italian sonnet, that there were 3 quatrains like AB, CD, CD, EF, EF. So first of all, these 3 quatrains means stanzas of 4 lines you can see here, but previously we have seen here that there were stanzas of 4 lines and 2 quatrains were there. But she changed it as 4 line stanzas means 3 quatrains. Then in this, the poet used to develop an idea, and finally in the couplet GG. So an epigrammatic conclusion means in the first 12 lines, the poet used to represent and develop the idea, and in the last couplet, the poet used to sum up or conclude the poem. So in total, see that 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 2 is equal to 14. So this was the Shakespearean sonnet. Then we have the Spenserian sonnet. Now, it was invented by Edmund Spenser, and that is why his name is given to the sonnet. And how he used to write the sonnet, as there were 3 quatrains and 1 couplet, just like Shakespearean sonnet. But it is different than that of Shakespearean sonnet because its rhyme scheme is different. So ABAB, BCBC, CDCD, EE. So you can compare the Shakespearean and Spenserian sonnets and you will definitely find the difference and similarity. Now, Miltonic sonnet was also there. Now, as there was Spenserian sonnet invented by Edmund Spenser, this was invented by Milton, John Milton. That is why it is called as Miltonic sonnet. So, how was the structure? Octave and sestet. It similarizes with that of Italian sonnet, but no major pause between the 2 units. So where we have put here the plus sign, there this poet was not keeping any pause. Then it also extends the sonnet to include political, religious, and occasional themes. So these were the major themes discussed by the poet into his sonnet. The major source for further development he used to keep. Next. Now, these are the precursors in Elizabethan poetry, and that is Holbein's drawing of Sir Thomas Watt. So by this drawing, we come to know how was the poet looking. Now, what were the changes this poet made in his sonnet? So he was the first poet who introduced two sonnets to English people. Then he was the imitator of Petrarchan poetry or sonnet. Then Italian 11 syllables line, he converted it into 10 syllable line, but yet not iambic pentameter. So generally the sonnets are written in iambic pentameter, but he changed that format. Then here we have another example of the poet in his own handwriting. So these evidences are there on internet and you can have a glance. Then after that we have Earl of Surrey. He made some changes in sonnet. First use of blank verse in his translation of Aeneid. So he made use of blank verse for the first time. Then 15 sonnets, 10 of which are English sonnets. So in total he has written 15 sonnets, but only 10 are English. The structure is alternative rhymes, quatrains plus couplet. So but not epigrammatic conclusion. So these are slight changes that the poets making in their writing sonnets. After him, the number comes of Sir Philip Sidney. His A Defense of Poesy, published in 1584, 82. Then poetry should teach and delight, art imitates nature, he was saying, but imitation of an ideal nature. So according to him, what is poetry? The poetry is the imitation of an ideal nature. And what poetry does, it should teach and delight and imitate art from nature. So he called poets as waits or maker, that means creator. Means he compared the poets to the god. Philip Sidney's innovations, like Milton and Shakespeare, what he did in his poetry was the first full sonnet sequence written by him was Astrophel and Stella, published in 1581. So 108 sonnets are there, and 11 songs are there. So it is based on an autobiographical situation of Penelope Devrox. Then 6 sonnets in Alexandrines, 12-syllable lines adapted from the French literature. Then epigrammatic conclusion in the last line, means he has kept the conclusion like that of Shakespeare. Then we have Edmund Spenser, a Renaissance, a Neo-Platonism we find in him. Then Puritanism we find in his poetry. Patriotism is also focused. Then conscious preparation for the task of an epic poem. The Shepherd's Calendar, Amoreti, Prothalamion, Epithalamion, and the Fairy Queen are his products, or he has written these collections of poems. Then what kind of innovations he had in his poetry? So Amoreti, early in 1990s, he has published this one, a sonnet sequence in which 89 sonnets are there. He was Puritan and humanist adaptation of the Petrarchan sonnet sequence. So his sonnets were inspired from the Petrarch. Spenserian sonnet. So we have learnt already that whatever changes he made in his sonnets are known by his name as Spenserian sonnets. So these are the linked quatrains to each other. That is the innovation he has done. Epigrammatic couplet is there like William Shakespeare. Then yoking together the spiritual and the fleshy. So this is one conclusion for an example given to you. Then we have, yes, William Shakespeare. His sonnets, see that the sonnets, the collection of sonnets he has produced in 1609, the climax and the end of the Elizabethan sonnet tradition by this one. Innovations, what he did was dramatic story of love triangle and rival poet, ironic treatment of Petrarchan concepts is there, and balance of quatrains and couplet is there in his sonnets, but there is no structural innovation. The simplest rhyme scheme he has kept for his sonnets. In his sonnets too, we find conventional patriarchal topics like unity and diversity of lovers, then immortalizing the beloved in poetry, contest between passion and virtue, and unification of love, love's constancy and transitoriness he has focused through his sonnets. Then we have sonnet number 3 by the same poet William Shakespeare. Now, order of sonnets he has kept in this 100, that means first to 126. It is addressed to a young man, WH. Who was he? Nobody knows. Earning him to marry and beget children. Then from 126 to 152, these sonnets are addressed to a dark lady, describing a love triangle between two men and a woman. Who was this dark lady? Nobody knows. Sonnet number 153 to 154, these are free adaptations of two classic poems. So by this sequence, we come to know that in total, Shakespeare has composed 154 sonnets. Now, the character is Shakespeare himself, and then a rival poet is unknown. Fair youth, the Earl of Southampton, he has used, and Dark Lady is also unknown. So, in that way, he has taken characters for his sonnets. Yes, so friends, this is the list of the sources I have taken, and thank you very much for your listening and watching this video.